When researching this case, it was difficult to drill down to the truth of what happened. For reasons I'll get to later on, most sources after a certain point, including many official ones, were too busy playing up a sensationalist, bastardized alternative to the reality. Headlines like "Amazing UFO Death Riddle" serve to entrench the narrative of the story firmly in the paranormal, driving all sensibility as far from the truth as possible. Now, this case is weird for plenty of reasons, but the one thing it wasn't was extraterrestrial in nature. Another issue is the litany of conflicting information surrounding the minutiae of the case. To that end, I've done my best to piece together whatever consistent reports I can find. Zigmund died twice, once when he suffered a heart attack, and again when the media distorted his story into total fantasy. Many things I want to show, including pointing the finger at an alleged culprit and providing the motive behind what really happened. So let's get into it. Zigmund Adamski was a 57-year-old Polish immigrant living in the humble working-class mining town of Tingley. Born in Masiewice, Poland, August 17, 1923, he moved to Tingley in 1960 with his wife Lottie and his 2 children. Zygmunt fled Poland after serving in the military to work as a collier in the Lofthouse colliery pit. An odd choice of job, given his health issues, but one he was, by all measures, consistent to and good at. He suffered from ischemic heart disease, emphysema, and a malformed lung, while his wife Lottie suffered from MS and was wheelchair-bound. Accounts at the time don't appear to hint at any serious trouble within their marriage. In fact, at the time of his death, Zygmunt had applied for early retirement from the colliery, which was to close a year later anyway, explicitly to be able to spend more time looking after his wife. Initially this was rejected, and although he was dismayed by this, he did carry on regardless. The letter that approved his early retirement arrived during the time span in which he went missing. The two lived a pretty plain life, neither of them being particularly wealthy, other than him potentially having a sizable pension back in Poland from his military service with the Polish Free Forces during World War II, a period of which he spent as a POW. His cousin, Czesława, and her son were staying with him in the run-up to his goddaughter Stephanie's wedding. Zygmunt was due to give her away and had written a speech for the event, something family and friends noted he was worried about. In the year prior, Stephanie's mother had taken out an injunction against her ex-husband, and the Adamskis had offered for her to stay with them until things had cooled over. It was during this period when Stephanie requested Zygmunt be the one to give her away, instead of her father, Jan. For reasons that are not clear, Lottie desired to move back to Poland, but Zygmunt didn't want to leave Tingley. Keep in mind at this time, Poland was still an Eastern Bloc country, and it's very likely that he simply felt the quality of life he had in England was better than what the two of them would have had back home. Zygmunt was also known to be outspokenly critical of the Soviet Union, something it's believed the police investigated at one point as a motive for his death. The day of June 6, 1980, Zygmunt went to Leeds to do some shopping with his cousin Czesława and her son in the early afternoon. When they returned, they all ate lunch together with Lottie at home. A friend of the family, Chris Zielinski, visits Zygmunt, and the two continue a chat they'd had over drinks the night before. Zygmunt gets a phone call from someone he takes in private. Shortly after, at around 3:30, Zygmunt says he's going to the local shop to buy some potatoes, as they were going to be having fish and chips for dinner. Chris offers to go with him, but Zygmunt refuses, saying he wants to go on his own. He's dressed in a suit with a white shirt and brown John Collier jacket. He takes his wallet containing £20 and his watch with him and sets out. As he's leaving, his neighbour next door is washing his car. The two of them chat very briefly before he continues down the street. When the evening rolls around and he hasn't returned, Lottie calls the police to report him missing. An appeal for information is published in the local paper the next day. There's an unconfirmed sighting of him in the town of Nelson later that night, an acupuncturist named Mr. Matram, a lead the police ultimately ignored but was published by the Halifax Courier. At 8 AM on the cold and wet morning of Wednesday the 11th of June, in Tomlin's coal yard, Todmorden, Trevor Parker starts his shift. He takes a quick walk around the yard to inspect it and finds nothing out of the ordinary. He then leaves at 11 AM to do similar checks at other premises. When he returns at approximately 3:45 PM, he discovers a man lying face down on top of a 10-foot pile of coal. Initially, he believes the man to be drunk and just sleeping in an odd place. When he's unable to get a response from him, he calls an ambulance. Paramedics are the first to arrive. They scramble up the pile and turn the man over. It's Zygmunt. His face is contorted in agony. He's wearing a white string vest and brown jacket, trousers with £5 in his pocket and shoes on his feet. But his shirt, watch and wallet are missing. His clothes have been buttoned up incorrectly, and he has full thickness burns on the back of his head, neck and breastbone, which are covered in a greasy green salve. During the autopsy, they discover that he also has circular shaped marks on his back. His hair has been shaved, supposedly post-mortem, and he has only a single day's growth of facial hair. He's not in rigor mortis. Police officers Alan Godfrey and Malcolm Agley arrive on scene shortly after. They're greeted by the paramedics who tell them, "You've got a murder on your hands." Recalling the incident in an interview years later, Alan Godfrey said, "I remember a theory suggested by the CID, who thought he might have fallen asleep under a lorry and the acid fell on his neck. But this wasn't the explanation, as I remember the pathologist telling me there wasn't acid on his neck. He was certainly alive on the day he was found. It's a real mystery, although one thing I do know, it was nothing to do with any aliens. That's a load of rubbish." Now it should be noted that examiners at the time did think these were chemical burns. However, I've not been able to find which pathologist he was referring to here. The discovering officers immediately suspected foul play, as evidently did the first responders. A lot about the discovery doesn't really make sense. If someone wanted to cover up their misdeed, why place the body in an elevated position where it would easily be found? That's discounting the effort it would have taken to drag a corpse up a shifting pile of coal to deposit it there in the first place. But maybe there was some odd relevance to leaving him on a coal pile? He was a collier after all. There was a fast-flowing river very close to the scene. Why not dump the body there? There was brief speculation that perhaps he had jumped into a coal lorry and been deposited there. However, Trevor Parker claims that there had been no deliveries of coal that day or the prior days. Another strange thing about the discovery is that supposedly the coal dust print on his neck was at an oblique angle, as if a shirt was present when he was deposited and subsequently removed. I'm uncertain about the veracity of this, however, as a compelling theory as to why his shirt was missing will come up later. It was estimated that the burns he suffered were inflicted 8 to 10 hours prior to his body being discovered. However, the fact that he was wearing a string vest is still unaccounted for. James Turnbull was the lead coroner for the Western District of Yorkshire, and as such was the senior legal authority on sudden deaths in the region. Having taken up the post in 1976, he was responsible for the inquest around Zigmund's case. James was not an insignificant and out-of-his-league backwoods official. Over the course of his career, he presided over cases such as the Yorkshire Ripper, the Bradford City Fire, and the Carol Wilkinson case. In professional regards, he was an unshakable and highly respected official, which is what makes his public remarks so out of character and damaging to the story. I truly believe that the cameras and media made him into a storyteller instead. A quote, "This is one of the most puzzling cases I've come across in 25 years. If someone proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around here at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow." And it is quite the most mysterious death I have investigated in 12 years as a coroner. As a trained lawyer, I have to rely on facts. Unfortunately, we have not been able to uncover any facts which may have contributed to his death. I tend to believe that there may be a simple explanation. However, I do admit that the failure of forensic scientists to identify the corrosive substance which caused Mr. Adamski's burns could lend some weight to the UFO theory. As a coroner, I cannot speculate, but I must admit that if I was walking over Ilkley Moor tomorrow and a UFO came down, I would not be surprised. Now, just 4 years after Adamski was found, the law in the UK was changed, prohibiting coroners from making statements like this, and it's not hard to see why. Something to note here is that the green salve found on Zigmund's neck was forensically analysed, and they were unable to determine the composition. The media took this to mean aliens, but even in the 80s this technology was still pretty sophisticated. It's more likely that the sample was either contaminated or simply composed of a home remedy of some kind. Despite being unable to name the chemical that caused the burns, Turnbull's description of the brown leathery skin is a textbook indicator of coagulative necrosis caused by a sulfuric acid wound. 6 months later, on November 28th, Alan Godfrey is responding to a call from a member of the public regarding cows being loose on a housing estate in Todmorden. It's very early in the morning and still dark. He hops into his patrol vehicle and sets out to look for them. While driving along the A646 Burnley Road, he sees a light. Initially, he thinks it's a double-decker bus that's skidded off the road. As he gets closer, he sees that the source of the light appears to be a diamond-shaped craft, approximately 20 feet wide and about 14 feet tall, hovering about 5 feet off the ground. He runs back to his vehicle to find the engine stalled. He made an effort to contact the station using both his UHF and VHF radios, but find both unresponsive. It's worth noting that this wasn't uncommon in this part of the country, however. The terrain had a fair number of radio dead zones as the region itself was in a deep valley. He instead decides to grab his notebook and returns to the craft to begin sketching it. He then experiences a blinding flash of light and finds himself driving away in the opposite direction. He pulls the car over and gets out to look back to where the craft was. It's gone. Not only that, one of his police boots is split horizontally across the sole, as if he had been dragged along the ground. His clothes were rumpled, and his hair felt staticky. What's interesting about this is that roughly 30 minutes before this encounter, a group of police officers in the nearby town of Halifax had also spotted a strange light in the sky, moving in the direction of Godfrey's encounter. 1 year later, Godfrey would undergo hypnotic regression and claimed to have encountered extraterrestrial beings, but he did say he still wasn't sure if what he claimed under regression was true or not. The sensationalist media had a field day with the news of this. It was widely reported, and given that not 6 months prior, Godfrey had been at the centre of a strange, unexplained death regarding a man with a name heavily tied to UFO lore, it's easy to see why the two became conflated, even if I think it's just because of shitty journalism. For those who don't know, Zigmund Adamski was a Polish immigrant in America in the 50s who claimed to have been abducted and flown to various planets and places. He's widely believed to be a charlatan, but his story was prolific and he wrote many books about it. It's not a stretch to call him one of the most famous alien witnesses in modern history, whether or not you believe his claims. Godfrey was largely mocked by his station for talking about this, even though he had the chief officer's permission to talk on TV about it. While researching this, I also came across a mocking poem his own colleagues wrote about him to a local paper, goading them to publish it, which they did. Following section is all allegation. Despite the fact he was questioned and released by the police, no action was taken against the person I'm about to talk about. I'm simply showing pieces of the puzzle that point suspicion at this individual. Earlier I mentioned Stephanie, Zigmund's goddaughter. Her father Jan was reportedly very unhappy about the fact that the Adamskis had taken in his wife after she filed an injunction against him for assaulting her. The fact that Stephanie had then asked Zigmund to give her away instead of Jan must have been salt in the wound. In the run-up to the wedding, Zigmund had confided in Chris Zielinski that he was worried about making the speech at the wedding. Chris further claimed that Zigmund would call at his house nearly every day before the wedding complaining about why it was that Stephanie's father couldn't give her away. Chris visited Jan after Zigmund disappeared and reported that he was in one hell of a state, he was sweating and didn't want to talk to the police. Chris convinced Jan to go to Bradford police station, however the officer at the desk had little interest in talking to them. Jan was later interviewed by Halifax police and released. Chris's primary suspect in Zigmund's disappearance was Jan. It's thought that Loy likely also suspected this, but now being alone was too afraid to speak up. So, with that in mind, what happened? You'll recall that Zigmund took a call in private shortly before leaving. Was this Jan luring him out? It's likely that he didn't intend to kill him, perhaps just scare him, or keep him literally tied up until after the wedding. Philip Mantle, another UFO researcher who lived in Tingley, reported that a phone call was once received at an office he was operating from by someone claiming to be Zigmund's niece, possibly Zislawa. She claimed that he was captured and kept tied up in a shed, that in an attempt to escape, he had knocked an open container of battery acid onto himself and shed his shirt in an attempt to prevent further damage. However, the incident triggered a heart attack as a result of his already ill health. Jan then allegedly took his body to the yard and dumped it atop a pile of anthracite beans. As for why he might have picked such a bizarre location to put Zigmund's body is anybody's guess. As I mentioned earlier, there was a river nearby he could have used. It's likely that his guilt meant that he wanted the body to be found and placed it somewhere it couldn't possibly be missed. I doubt that he knew that doing so would lead to such a massive and bizarre amount of coverage on the case. I've had no luck tracking down Jan or finding any information on what became of him. For all intents and purposes, Zigmund's case is closed in the eyes of the police. It's an open verdict, but they have since destroyed all remaining records and evidence gathered. They actually released his body while the case was actively open, and Loy took him back to Poland to bury him. The police, the coroner, and the media all failed Zigmund and his family. Their careless handling and muddying the waters denied him the justice he deserved. For over 40 years, Zigmund's story has been found almost exclusively in UFO and paranormal publications. TV shows covering the case all leaned into the ET angle, and as a result the truth was drowned out. Every article the media published calling his death a riddle pushed the narrative further and further out. His name became a preamble for a policeman's UFO encounter, instead of a loving father and husband losing his life because of a petty man's rage. When the coroner himself chose stories over science, what's left is a muddy and confusing mess that benefited nobody but Jan. Taken from his hometown by someone he knew and kept captive in a dingy shed to die. The real mystery isn't how he wound up on a coal pile, but why the system allowed his life to become nothing but a weird tale in pulp publications. He deserved better. And that's the story of Zigmund Adamski. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I'm pretty new to this, it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I finally overcame a truly titanic bout of executive dysfunction to finish it. Let me know down in the comments if you have any theories or information or just what you thought. If you want to see more of these deep cut cases, please consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. I plan to do many more of these. Lastly, I'd like to thank John Hansen and Philip Mantle for their input during the research of this case. The content of this video was sourced in large part from Chapter 6 of Haunted Skies Volume 8, where John and his colleagues go into detail with a follow-up investigation they did some years after the event. It's somewhat difficult to get a hold of this book, but if you can, I think it paints the clearest picture of what really happened. Some other details came from the Pen and UFO Mystery by Jenny Randalls and Alan Godfrey's own book, Who or What Were They? Thanks for watching. See ya.